I want to, thank all of those folks joining us on Facebook Live. I want to thank all those folks joining us on YouTube Live. I also want to thank all those folks joining us on Blog Talk Radio. And I want to thank All About Us Radio with the Whitney Foundation to thank for giving us this opportunity to talk to the youth, as well as to people, giving them a sense of what needs to be done when it comes to resumes. Last week, just to give you a little recap, we had Mr. Ross on last week that talked a little bit about pressure, how to deal with pressure. He talked a little bit of how he dealt with pressure in the past. Very insightful information. If you get a chance, definitely go ahead and check out Blog Talk Radio. If you get a chance, check out Blog Talk Radio, last week's episode of Employism Magazine, and you'll have Mr. Ross, who talked a little bit about how to deal with pressure. We also had on Tiffany Evans, who was our guest moderator, and she broached a lot of questions with Mr. Ross, and he talked about how to deal with pressure. He also has a book out, so definitely, check that out. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the elements of a resume and how to really make employers kind of take notice. We're also going to have Claudia Johnson join us, who's a current store manager, who's going to give you some insight as to what she looks for, what elements she looks for on a resume. I'm going to give you some real-time information. I recently had a pleasure of really sitting in with the Labor Department this week and observe one of their trainings on resumes. And I didn't find it to be overly informative when it comes to resumes. And I'm sure a lot of, job training programs really don't talk about the elements of a resume. When I worked at FedCap, I used to do a daily workshop on resumes. And I could just tell you, most of the time, folks would tell me that the things that I covered in the workshop they had never seen before. So, we want to make certain that we cover all the elements of a resume so that people know how to impress employers. Because like I said, there are no good or bad resumes. There are resumes that get you the job, and there are resumes that don't. And so we want to be one of those folks that have the resumes that get us the job. So let's get into it. Right, so the first thing is a lot of people are really unsure about whether they should have one-page resumes or two-page resumes. The reality is that you really want to have a one-page resume. The reason being is that, like I said, a lot of employees don't spend a lot of time with resumes. I know as a former store manager, I didn't spend a lot of time with resumes. So the resumes that were 2 pages, oftentimes, they got kind of pushed to the side because you don't have a lot of time to read a lot of information. So one-page resumes are usually ideal. The other thing that you want to now, don't get me wrong, it's okay to have a 2-page resume, but you want to make certain that your 2-page resume is 2-page worthy. Too many times I've seen resumes where the resume actually shouldn't have been 2 pages. It really should have been 1 page. But because the person didn't know how to do a resume effectively, they ended up having 2 pages when it was not necessary. So employees can kind of tell when they look at a resume and see that it's not 2-page worthy. So you want to make certain that you have a 1-page resume, if possible. If you have 2 pages, like my resume on occasion, and you should know you're going to have more than one type of resume. A lot of times we'll have 4 or 5 different type of resumes. I have a resume that I give to employers. Hey, what's going on, Shanta? I have resumes that I give to employers that are 2 pages, and then I have resumes that I give to employers that are 1 page. The employers that are afraid, well, I don't like to use the word afraid. Let me change that. The employers that like to lowball you and they're trying to get you on the cheap, those are the employees that I give a 1 page resume to, and that's because I don't want to scare them off. Employees get scared off relatively easy because a lot of times, a lot of employees don't want to pay you top dollar. So what happens is, if they see a person with a lot of work history, extensive amount of work history, a lot of times they get scared off. So in order to avoid scaring off employers, sometimes you may have to go with a 1 page resume. And I don't like to use the word dumb down a resume, but the reality is that sometimes you're going to need to dumb down a resume. The reason being is that if you have too much work experience, they feel as though you're going to ask for too much money. So I hate to say it, but that's the kind of economy we have right now. There was a time that experience was king. Experience is no longer king. King is now whether they can get more for less. So if they get an employee with an extensive amount of experience for less, that's what they want. So you don't want to put too much experience on their resume. Particularly, you want to make certain that it's 1 page. A lot of folks like myself who have like a significant amount of experience, their information is going to go towards 2 pages. Don't do that. Have 1 page. Because that way they feel as though they're getting more for less. The other thing is, and there are instances where your resume may be 2 pages, where it's okay. One instance would be if you're applying for a federal job, right? So there are a significant difference between your standard resume and a federal resume. So right now, I would highly encourage folks to apply to the federal government. There are a lot of opportunities with the federal government. Unfortunately, you have a very distinct resume that you need to provide. And because of that reason, that resume is going to be 2 pages. And because of that reason, you want to go to a professional. So, of course, I'm available. You can always go to craigapalmer.com if you need me to do your resume, your federal resume. There are also some other folks out there as well. So if you need someone to help you kind of put that resume together, I would highly encourage it because that is where the opportunities are. And those are the employees that will pay you top dollar. The federal government, as crazy as it may sound, they don't skimp on salary. So they want the best candidates and they're willing to pay top dollar. So I would highly, highly, highly encourage folks to apply with the federal government, right? And so you want to make certain that you put that resume together. And if you don't want to go to a professional, you can also pick up a book. I'm not going to show you my books on resume writing, but I have a ton of them as well. But I am also a certified resume writer for the Federal Institute. So if you need help putting that resume together, not a problem. I will help you. The other thing that you want to make certain that is omitted from the resume is obviously your birth date, your health status, your social security card number. Now, there are instances, like I mentioned just now with the federal resume, where you would put your social security card number, okay, and you would put salary information. The federal resume is considerably different than your standard resume. Totally different. And so because of that reason, you want to make certain you go to someone who knows what the hell they're doing, right? Obviously, in your standard resume, there's no I's. I recently had a resume from a young lady who had, I did this. I was responsible for that. There are no I's in a resume. So if you see an I in a resume right off the bat, you know something is wrong. The other thing is, we never say anything negative about previous employers on a resume. And I have seen some things like that, so as crazy as it may sound. We never talk about negatives on a resume, right? So if you have something that is not extraordinary, I wouldn't put it on a resume. For instance, I did a workshop recently where I was evaluating some resumes, and the young lady had on her resume she types 45 words a minute. Well, think about it for a moment. The standard typing speed right now is about 55. It used to be 55. Right now it's about 60 words a minute. If you put on your resume you type 45 words a minute, you're below average. So in a situation like that, she would either omit that she types 45 words a minute, or she would stretch it a little bit and say she types 55 words a minute. And that's not lying. So I want people to understand, if you type 45 words a minute and you say you type 55 words a minute, it's not a lie. And the reason why it's not a lie is because you have the capability of typing 55 words a minute if you type. Oh, hold on one second. Yeah. Hello, Ms. Johnson?
Yes, hello, Fred. How are you?
I'm good, Claudia. I'm sorry. We're on the radio show. I want to thank you for joining Employism Magazine this evening. Tonight we're talking a little bit about elements of a resume. And I know that you hire folks. I know the holiday season is right upon us. So I wanted to bring you on and talk a little bit about what you look for on your on resumes when you're hiring people. So what are some of the elements that you look for when you are hiring people?
Well, some of the things that I look for is I work for a really fast-paced company. Like it's Christmas all the time, so I look for people who I feel can handle that. So I look for companies that I feel that can handle that. So like I look for people who may have worked for, like, let's say McDonald's, because the McDonald's is always busy. They're always hectic, and usually people working there, they have to be fast. People who have maybe worked for, like, let's say a Toys R Us, because I mean, let's face it, when they go through the holiday season, it gets crazy in there on them as well, so they can handle it too. Maybe even people from a Shake Shack. I also look for people. Well, also with that being said, I also go by the experience, because I've shopped I've went to McDonald's, went to a Shake Shack, and I've also been in Toys R Us, so I know how that goes. So I know that they can handle it. I also look for how long they've stayed with the company, because I don't want people who are flighty. So if they've been there, like, let's say, maybe like 2 months here and maybe 1 month there, I usually don't go for them. I try to go for people who stayed with their company for a minimum of, like, maybe like 2 years or more.
Mm-hmm.
I also look for the reason why they left. That's really important as well, because a lot of the things that you see on resumes sometimes, I tell you. So I look for how long they stayed with the company, reasons why they left, and if the company is, like, fast paced, and I feel like they can handle my company.
Right. And let me ask you, what do you guys do in terms of a background check?
Well, unfortunately, unless they are applying for management, they don't do the background check. So what I'll do is, if on the resume they have somebody like a previous employer that they say, may you contact the employer, I'll try to call the old employer and see how they were. A lot of times they don't really give much, but I'll attempt to call and at least see if they work there.
Oh, okay. So you do actually pick up the phone and call.
Absolutely. On the resume, if they don't put that you can contact the previous employer, if they don't put yes, that's another thing. If they don't put yes to that, then I usually don't go for it either.
Oh, okay. So
because if I can't contact your previous employer, then,
it gives you red flags.
I don't really know why you left.
Right. Right. So let me ask you. I know that you mentioned that when you look at the resumes, you look at people that have been there for a short amount of time, that haven't been jumping around. So what if the person worked for staffing agencies, and you see that they kind of jumped around a little bit because it was short term? What about that?
Well, if it says agency, I mean, then that's something different. But a lot of times, the people don't put that they work for an agency.
Mm-hmm.
They just have the company. I've never seen, like, agency, but if I see agency, then that's something different. everybody knows that when you work for a staffing agency, that a lot of times they'll keep you on for like maybe like a 2 or 3 month stint, and then you move on to something else.
Right. So now let me ask you, because I know you've hired a lot of people in the past for like the holiday season. Now, after the holiday season, do you keep people? Because I know as a store manager, what I used to do is look for stars, and I would keep maybe 1 or 2 people after the holiday season. So, do you keep people after the holiday season if they really performed well?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I actually try to make sure that I have space for the stars that perform during the holiday season. Because in retail, unfortunately, the turnover is so high nowadays that you kind of do need to keep some of the people from the holiday season.
Right.
Sometimes you look up. I looked up last year and kept like 2 people.
Awesome, awesome. So, what advice would you give to folks if they were looking to apply for opportunities this holiday season? What advice would you give them?
I would definitely say that, in my personal opinion, the old school method still works, and that is going into the store personally to speak to the store manager or the manager on duty to see if they were hiring.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, people only really want to work for people that they like, which is, in my opinion, why you have to go through so many interviews in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times I usually hire people who have come into my store and I've seen and was able to talk to in person, and then I'll invite them back for an interview. Because a lot of times employers don't really have time to sort through all of those resumes online.
Okay.
But if they can get a feel for you in person, then that really helps. So I would say walk into the stores and try to network that way.
Right, right. Okay, so that's some valuable information. So let me just ask you, just because this is because something that we kind of discussed a couple of weeks ago. Give me a couple of questions that you ask on an interview.
I ask, when was the last time that you went above and beyond for a customer? I ask, I ask like multitask questions, like, when were you ever put in a position where you had to, you were ringing up on the register, had a customer asking you a question, and your manager was calling you, like, in what order would you take care of that? I ask questions in regards to the register, like, if a customer gave you a $20 bill and the change was, and the transaction was $9.72, how much would you have to give back? So that just in case, the register starts working, they know how to count and get the right change.
Right.
Yes, Craig, listen, because sometimes you punch in the wrong number, you don't want them giving away your whole store. Right. I also ask loss prevention questions. If you saw someone stealing, if you saw somebody stealing, how would you handle it? If you saw one of your fellow employees stealing, what would you do? Mm-hmm. Like that.
Right. Okay. Great. And so the last thing is, because I know one of the things that I always used to tell folks in my workshops was to always ask a question at the end of the interview. Are you a believer in that, or is that not important?
No, that's important. It's important that the person that you're interviewing feels comfortable, Craig. I ask, what do I ask at the end in some of my interviews? Do you have any questions for me? Where I ask a few things at the end of my interview. Not all the time, depending on how much time I have and what's going on with work. But I do try to ask a few questions towards the end of the interview. But mainly, like, do you have any questions for me?
So the last question I have for you is, and this is something that I've always kind of stressed, because this is some of the things that I know bothered my former colleagues when I was a store manager, and it was when people brought up the idea of money during an interview. So during an interview, do you ask them what type of salary they're looking for, or do you wait for an offer to be made, or how do you deal with the salary issue?
You know, Craig. Well, I state that Dollar Tree pays $13 per hour, which is the minimum wage,
Mm-hmm.
and then I see if that's okay with them.
Okay.
I state it because I'm not allowed to give them more than that.
Okay.
I'm not authorized, unfortunately, to give more than that, or I would, but I have to. I usually state how much we pay.
Right. So now, if the person had more experience, they wouldn't get more than $13. Well, because I know in New York State, I mean, I know a lot of people believe the minimum wage is 15. So is the minimum wage not 15 in New York State?
Not yet. I believe that that's going to take place in like January.
Okay. So for now,
but as of right now, it's 13.
Okay, great. So listen, Claudia, you have been a godsend. I appreciate you. You have to come on again. That was a lot of valuable information. So I want to thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedule to come on, and definitely come on in the future.
Okay, no, not a problem, Craig. Thank you for having me.
Alrighty, take care. Have a good night.
Take care. You too. Bye bye.
So as you guys heard it from Ms. Johnson, Claudia Johnson, who's a store manager, she kind of let it slip. She's with Dollar Tree. So I won't say which location, but I could just tell you that she hires a lot of folks. A lot of retail establishments are very similar in what she said and how they conduct their business. I know if someone came into my store and I liked them, I would definitely set up an interview at a later time with them. So definitely, use that approach and then follow up. Definitely follow up. So we're talking a little bit about some of the elements of a resume. Also, you might want to pick up my book, The 10-Step Employment Pocket Guide, where I talk about all the elements of a resume. I talk about how to structure the resume and how to make it look a little differently. Right. Now, one of the things that you want to do, one of the elements of a resume is you want to make certain that you don't have any spelling errors. So my suggestion would be and believe it or not, you can't, as even as a professional resume writer, I always have one of my colleagues look at a resume as I construct it. I have someone else take a look at it because another set of eyes is actually a good thing because you're not always going to catch a mistake. Believe it or not, oftentimes we're impervious to catching our mistakes, right? We have mistakes, and because we look at it and it might be right, you need someone else's eye to kind of take a look at it and catch it. So you should let as many people as humanly possible look at your resume. I mean, a lot of people, keep their resumes hidden, and they're like, no, I don't want to show it to people. Don't look at it from that perspective. Take the resume, give it to someone to look at. Another suggestion, and this is something that I have in my book, and it's always worked, and everyone that's purchased my book that have sent me comments or emails have said it was such a great tip, and that is to use professionals to your advantage. So, for instance, let's say there's a store near your home, right? And let's just say, for argument's sake, you don't necessarily want to work there. So let's just say if I lived on 125th Street, right? And I needed a trained eye to give me some feedback on my resume. I might go into like a Planet Fitness, right? And there's like a Planet Fitness like on 126th Street and Lenox Avenue. I would go into Planet Fitness and I would ask to speak to the manager, right? Now the manager's going to come in and say, "Hi, how's it going? My name is so and so." And you say, "Oh, okay, how you doing? My name is such and such." Listen, I've always been, a big fan of Planet Fitness. I know you guys hire a lot of people. I'm into fitness. I would love to work for a great organization like yours at some point down the road. Can I give you my resume to take a look at and give me some thoughts? And I could tell you, most managers will say to you, "Sure, give it to me. Let me take a look at it." If you have your resume handy, give it to them and they'll take a look at it. If not, you can email it to them. In some cases, they may tell you we have a job opportunity and look to hire you. So use professionals as an opportunity to proofread your resume. So even, a supervisor, if I had a resume, like sometimes I have resumes that I do for executives that are looking to progress in their companies and they're already in management. So I might send a resume to a director that I know, and I might say to him, hey, so and so, take a look at this resume and give me your thoughts, right? And so a director might look at it, and if they like it, they might say, listen, these are some of the things that I liked. I've recently had a client that had a resume, and she was looking to take actually be a director. So I actually sent it to some grant writers, and I sent it to a couple of folks that have hired high level executives before, and they were able to really kind of critique the resume and really give me some thoughts on how to really polish the resume up. So use that as an opportunity. Use your pastor. Use executives. Use managers to really give you some feedback as to whether the resume is top notch, right? Because if you do that, you're getting basically some information free of charge, right? So that's a great tip. A lot of people don't really think of it that way, but as opposed to, because a lot of times people are uncertain about their resumes. And so a lot of times they're like, hey, can you take a look at it? And, for professional resume writers, we charge for that, right? Although, I've looked at friends' resumes for free, um, which I shouldn't. But I ain't trying to make $1 million doing resumes, so I'll look at someone's resume for free and make some suggestions. And if they want me to do it, then I'll do it for them, and usually give them a little discount if they're family or friends. But overall, you want to get someone to take a look at your resume and give you some thoughts, because a resume is critical to your success. And the reason why is because you got to understand something. Your resume is it's a snapshot of who you are. And so the employer doesn't know you from Adam. So the first time they look at your resume, they're going to make some assumptions based upon what they see on your resume. So because of that reason, you want to make certain that your resume is on point. Particularly if you're looking to grow within your organization, you're looking to secure a job within an organization, especially if you're looking to get a job with the federal government, or you're looking to get a job in civil service, right? These companies, these areas critique resumes very significantly. So because of that reason, you want to make certain that the resume is on point. Another thing that you want to do is make certain that the font is not, and there are ways to play with a font. Now, I know recently someone said to me they like to use Arial, they like to use some. I'm a believer that if something ain't broke, you don't fix it. So I always use New Times Roman. And the reason why I like New Times Roman is because it's very clean. It fits on the page very nicely. And the other thing is, and this is something as crazy as it sounds, people are accustomed to looking at New Times Roman, particularly HR managers. So because HR managers are accustomed to looking at New Times Roman, when they see fonts that are outside of what they're accustomed to looking at, they have a tendency sometimes to not really appreciate it or like it. So I always suggest to go with New Times Roman. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Don't try to get too creative. Stick with the font that employers like. I used to advise clients in the past that resume paper wasn't that important. But I actually had a employer who actually said to me, if a person drops off a resume to me with resume paper, which is high quality paper, they usually take it and look at it a little bit more, because the person took the time to put it on a high end paper. So if you're going into a store like Claudia mentioned, then I would suggest you put it on resume paper. Don't use your standard white paper. Get resume paper, maybe off-white. Get the heavy, thicker paper, and give it to an employer. It's going to stand out a little bit more, and you might get a call back. Some of the other things that it's actually, I'm going to mention this, and this is something I kind of discuss in my workshops, but I'm going to mention it here on Facebook Live. And that's it. If you have a job where it didn't end well, depending upon how long you worked there, that job may never have existed. If I worked at a job for a year or two and it didn't go well, and that does happen with sometimes with folks, I may omit it entirely from the resume. Now, you have to understand something. As you're designing a resume, you're going to put things on there, you're going to take things off, employees on, employees off. So if you can't get a really good reference from an employee because it didn't go well, you might have to omit it entirely, right? And you can do that. You can pick and choose what goes on a resume. And the reason why is because you have to understand something. As we do resumes, like I said, the most important thing is to get the job. And so if you have something on there that's not sterling, or they can't call the employer, like like Claudia said, it might send up some red flags if you say not to contact the employer. So you always want to be in a position where they can contact the employer. Now, one of the things that you can do, if it wasn't a good relationship with that employer, refer them to the HR department. Now, the HR department probably hasn't worked directly with you. They kind of only can talk about when you started and when you left the job. So that's a good way to kind of avoid getting some bad press from a previous employer. Avoid them speaking to your direct supervisor entirely. And if it's, I know for me personally, being a hiring manager in the past, if I have, a position where I need a strong candidate, I'm going to see to it that I do kind of reach out to the previous employer. So, like I said, definitely have your references in line. Have some employers that can be reached and can say some good things about you. It is very, very important because employers nowadays are reaching out to folks. They are doing background checks. They're emphatic about it. Like, they're not going to hire people without really kind of checking it out. So definitely, get your references in order now, right? So what I'm going to do, for those folks who are joining me on Facebook Live and those folks on Blog Talk Radio, I need to play a couple of commercials. So give me a moment while I play these commercials.
Hi everyone, I am Shavonna Johnson, CEO and founder of All About Us Global Media Productions Group, TV, radio, and magazine. CEO of the Whitney E. Johnson Foundation, Incorporated. We are a 501c3 organization on a mission to educate, engage, and mentor our parents and teens in communities on current issues surrounding our youth. Today, we are asking for your support to continue providing our informative programming through our various media platforms. To make a donation, visit the Whitney E. Johnson site at www.wijfoundation.org, or you can reach us at 631-521-7699 for more information. And as a reminder, all donations given are tax deductible. On behalf of the Whitney E. Johnson Foundation, we thank you for listening and your support. Check out Employism.com, the new hot online magazine on employment and business. It's growing fast. You still have time to place an ad in the magazine and in their new video game on Google Play Store. Employism Adventures, September 1st. Free download at Employism.com. And the world's biggest online magazine store, Issue.com. 20 million daily visitors. Don't miss out, guys. Employism Magazine, the latest trends in employment and business. Welcome to BitcoinsNation.com, your go-to informational platform for the cryptocurrency industry. Bitcoin is the new crypto or digital currency that is revolutionizing the financial markets and, in fact, sweeping the world. If you're 18 years of age or older with an email address, you're eligible to begin participating in this new global phenomenon, all through the convenience of your cell phone. Getting started with Bitcoins Nation is simple and inexpensive. Bitcoins Nation invites you to our
All right, so we're back. We're talking a little bit about elements of a resume. All right, and so some of the things that you want to make certain, and like I said, I had the opportunity to kind of sit in on a resume workshop recently with the Labor Department, and there were some things that they talked about that I didn't completely agree with, but listen, they're able to, conduct their workshops the way they want. Like for instance, one of the things that I highly suggest is that people put an address on their resume. Very, very important, right? Because just working in homeless shelters, employees are looking for people that are stable, and so they want to see an address on there. And those folks that omit addresses on their resumes, honestly, I would never hire someone who didn't have an address on their resume. And there are women, well, let me not just use women, but just people in general who have a tendency to omit their address on their resume. So I would suggest have an address on there. Very, very important. Secondly, objective. Now we no longer use objectives on a resume. One of the things that you can use in that place is a profile, overview, highlights, summary, right? So those are some of the things that you can use on a resume. And actually, employers do take a moment to look at those things. They do look at the profile, they do look at the summary, because it's a 2 or 3 line snapshot of who you are, and it really kind of puts the employee in a certain mind frame about the resume that they're looking at. So very, very important. I would suggest that you have that on there. Not objective, because objective is obsolete, but definitely profile, overview, highlights, summary. You want to use one of those things at the very top of the resume. The other thing is you want to understand that all work experience is valuable work experience. So whether you did an internship, volunteer work, all of this can go on a resume, right? Any awards, honors. Now, sometimes you don't need award and honors, but believe it or not, so many few people get awards and honors. So believe it or not, when you put awards and honors on a resume, it actually separates you a lot of times from other candidates. So if you won Employee of the Month at a previous job, or Volunteer of the Month, or Volunteer of the Year, something like that, at your previous employer, put it. If you got an award of some sort, when I worked at Verizon, I received the Verizon Excellence Award, which is right here. And so that's something that if I was looking to impress the employer, I might mention it, because that will separate me from other candidates, right? So use that to your advantage, because that separates you from other candidates, right? Some other things that we want to be mindful of on the resume. I think I talked a little bit about no spelling errors. Get a different set of eyes to look at the resume. Use your spell check. There's a great software that I use as an author. Obviously, I do a lot of writing. So one of the things that I use is called, and it's a free software. It's called Grammarly. It's something that's free, downloadable to your computer. Grammarly is really, really interesting because it'll make corrections for you, and it'll catch a lot of things that spell check won't. So if you're designing a resume, I would suggest use Grammarly. It's free, right? The other thing is there's a couple of things that people do that, believe it or not, will drive you nuts. And it'll drive you nuts for a couple of different reasons. Why? One is because it'll take valuable space up off of a resume when you need that valuable space. And one of those things is people have a tendency to put on a resume soft skills. So for instance, they'll put on a resume very responsible. Well, when you get hired by an employer, it should be a given that you're going to be responsible. there's no employer out there that hires someone to be irresponsible. So you don't have to put responsible on a resume. It goes without saying. Loyal. They expect you to be loyal. When in fact, a lot of times, if you're an employee, you kind of know you're almost as loyal as the paycheck allows you to be. Because if you're making, let's say $15 an hour and someone offers you $20 an hour, how much loyalty are you going to really provide? You're going to probably end up leaving because that's a significant difference in salary. So, but they expect you to be loyal. They expect you to be energetic. They expect you to be outgoing. These are things that are givens. So you don't have to put them on a resume. They expect you to be that way, right? Some other things that we want to be mindful of, and these are little minor things, but these are elements that people look for. You want to make certain that you have a professional email address. Nowadays, because there's so many emails out there and stuff like that, some people have a tendency to have email addresses that are personal email addresses. So like if you have like Fab599 or Little Richie 44 or something like that, that's not considered professional. So one of the things that you want to do is make certain that you have a email address that is your first and last name, and then usually a series of numbers, unless you have a name that's very unique. If you have a name that's unique, then you're probably going to be able to have that email address without a number. But if you have something like John Collins or Richard Johnson or something like that, you're going to need to have some numbers at the back of it because these are common names, right? So, hey, Dimitri, what's going on? Hey, John, Mr. Ross, good to see you. To Neil, what's going on? Thank you for all of those folks who joined us on Facebook Live. Some of the other things, so like I was mentioning, you want to make certain that you have a professional email address. Now, you should know, email addresses are free. So, one of the things that you want to consider doing is having multiple email addresses. You want to have an email address that's exclusive on your resume that is only for job search. And the reason why you want to have a resume email address that's exclusive to job search is because if you get an email to that email address, you know it's regarding an employer. You know it's about money, right? And then you want to have an email address that's exclusive to friends and family. So if a family member reaches out to you, great. But if someone reaches out to you with the email address that you designed for your resume, you know they're looking to get you some paper. They're looking to put some money in your pocket. So you definitely want to make certain that you respond to that email address very quickly. Because I've seen instances where people have lost opportunities. Why? Because they had one email address for personal and business. And because we receive a lot of junk mail and we receive emails from friends and family, what a tendency that happens to happen at times is that by the next day, if you don't check your email address regularly, if you got an important email, it might be pushed to the next day, and you'll miss it. And it might be a email that pertains to an employer that involve hiring you for a job or offering you some nice money. So, very, very important. Have that that email address set up exclusively for your resume so that you don't miss out on opportunities. In terms of education, with education, if you have a high school diploma and then you have a degree, high school diploma drops off. I've seen some instances where people have their high school diploma and their college degree on their resume. We don't put both. If you have a college degree, high school drops off. Now, if you've gone to college, but you didn't graduate, then in that instance, you might put the high school and then you might put currently enrolled in college, or you can put down the amount of credits you received so far. But In that particular case, you haven't completed college, so high school would go on the resume. All right. And you can also kind of play with it. You can put a projected date of graduation. You can put how many credits you've achieved so far. In some cases, you can put grade point average if it's exceptional. Right? There are ways to kind of play with it so that way you pique the interest of the employer. Very, very important because, like I said, there are no bad resumes. There are only resumes that get you an interview, and there are resumes that employers will ignore. We don't want to have a resume that an employer is going to ignore. We want to have a resume that the employer actually looks at. All right. And like I said, on the resume, all experience is good experience. So if you did volunteer work, you did an internship, right? You did a summer youth. All of that is considered favorably. And as you notice, Claudia talked about folks that have worked with companies like McDonald's, that have worked in fast-paced environments. Sometimes people look at these jobs negatively, McDonald's and places like that. Believe it or not, employers look at those companies favorably. They know that customers that go into McDonald's can be difficult at times. They know customers coming into a Home Depot can be difficult at times. They're aware of this situation, so they are willing to hire folks that have worked at these locations because they know these folks can deal with pressure. They know that they can deal with fast-paced environments. So these are things that we want to be mindful of. Even if you have a situation where you're at a company where you felt like you didn't really like it or stuff like that, don't worry about it. Employers look at it favorably, right? And so if you look over here, you'll see to the right of the screen, you'll see my book, The 10-Step Pocket Employment Guide. You can pick that up at CraigAPalmer.com. Right, this is Employism Magazine. Every week we talk about issues regarding employment, everything employment. Like I mentioned, we had Andrew Ross on last week who talked about dealing with pressure. We got to have him back on because our audio failed us last week. This week it looks like the audio is playing pretty favorably this week, but it didn't play too favorably last week. So definitely check out Blog Talk Radio. Check out some of the previous shows. A couple of weeks ago, we had a really good speaker, a teacher from, I believe, was it Drexel or Penn State? I forget his name off the top of my head. Jones. I believe his last name was Jones. And he had some really great information about how to get a free master's degree, how to get the college to pay you a salary while you get a free master's degree. I mean, really impressive information. He also talked about how to do studying as well, right? Because how we study in high school is completely different from how we study for college, right? And a lot of folks that are going back to school and doing online courses and who haven't been in school for a long time, who are going back into into that fray in terms of learning, might find it challenging. So because of that reason, we want to make certain that we study effectively because we want to progress, obviously. So he had a really, really good, some really valuable information on that. So feel free to go to Blog Talk Radio 2 weeks ago and check out the interview I had with Mr. Jones. Very, very good information. So let's wrap it up in a nutshell. Some of the elements that we talked about for a valuable element of a resume. So we talked about making certain, if you can, make the resume a one-page resume. We talked about making certain that we had a profile overview, highlight, summary. We talked about having previous information on there. Remember, when you do the application, you want to make certain that you check off that they can contact your previous employer. Employers will check. And if you say you can't contact a previous employer, it sends up red flags, so we don't want to do that. We want to have a professional email address, right? I would suggest you have more than one. We want to make certain that we limit the amount of soft skills on the resume, like we talked about, putting things on the resume that, like, you're responsible, you're loyal, hardworking, energetic, outgoing. No. And the reason why is because that's what they expect you to be. Now, there are things you can put on a resume. If those things, you have to eliminate them, you can put good at conflict resolution, good working is in a team setting, great problem solver. These things are not standard. Like, not everyone knows how to solve a problem. There are a lot of folks, especially in retail, if they get faced with a problem, the first thing they do is call a manager. And I can tell you, managers hate that. Managers want people to be able to solve problems. And so if you put, adept at solving problems, good decision maker, these things, good team player. Not everyone's a good team player, right? Some people don't work well with others. Some people have, issues with personality issues and things of that nature. So, you want to make certain that you can put good team player on it. That's not a given. So I want to thank everyone that joined us on Blog Talk Radio. I'm going to end with our last commercial of the evening. And join us every Thursday at 8 p.m. where we talk about everything employment. This is Employism Magazine. And I want to wish everyone to have a safe weekend and have a great evening. Take care.
Hi, everyone. I am Shavonna Johnson, CEO and founder of All About Us Global Media Productions Group,